Hello, today we are going to learn about the difference between a prime and composite number. Now, all numbers have labels, either prime or composite. Just like in a school, everybody in the building is labeled either students or teachers. And this goes the same for numbers. Every number is either labeled prime or composite. Now, just as a reminder, prime numbers are the numbers that have exactly two factors. So, for example, right over here, what are the factors of 3? They're only 1 and 3. So notice the only factors are 1 and 3. So if you look at the number 3 and you're thinking, what multiplication facts create the number 3? 1 times 3 are the only multiplication facts that create that number. Because 3 has exactly two factors, it is called a prime number. Now, there are many prime numbers that we have. 7 would also be a prime number. Why is 7 a prime number? Now let's think. The only multiplication facts that create 7 are 1 times 7. Therefore, 1 and 7 are the only factors of 7, making this a prime number. Now, when we're looking at composite numbers are a little bit different. They are the numbers that have more than two factors. So in this example here, it says, what are the factors of 6? We have 1, 2, 3, and 6. Now, how do we get those numbers? First, you take a look at 6 and think of what are the factors of 6? What multiplication facts create that number? So first, we can always start with 1 because 1 is always a factor of every number. So first, we do have 1 times 6. But looking at 6, I first recognize, wow, that's an even number. So that means 2 has to be a factor. So 2 times some number gives me 6. 2 times 3 is 6, making 2 and 3 also a factor pair. Now, because 6 has more than two factors, it is a composite number. Now, the numbers 0 and 1 are neither prime nor composite. Those are two very special numbers, and they don't go into either category. Now, looking below is a chart that we talked about in class last week, and many of you have been using this chart to help you identify prime and composite numbers. Now, we went through each of these numbers and discovered which ones are prime and composite. However, moving forward, I want you to try and think of other ways besides looking at this chart to identify if they are prime or composite. And I have a few strategies that we're going to talk about to take a look. Now, the first number I do want to start with is 2. Now, many of you know 2 is my lucky number. Why is it my lucky number? There's 3 reasons. The first reason is my birthday is July 2nd. The next reason is my favorite Yankee player who's now retired is Derek Jeter, and his number happened to be 2. And also, 2 is a very special number because it is the only even prime number. That means it is the only even number that we have in our number system that is prime. So that means the only factors are 1 and 2. So 1 times 2 is 2, and 1 and 2 are my only facts that create the number 2. All other even numbers are going to be a composite number. Now, I'm very fortunate to have Miss Muley here who's going to continue talking about some even numbers.
Okay, boys and girls, so here's our first one, 2. Any even number has 2 as a factor. Which number does not have 2 as a factor? 84, 98, 67, 106, or 568. Please make sure you look at the digit in the ones place to make this
to determine if it's an even number. So looking at 84, we look here and we see, wow, 4 is in my ones place. That means 4 happens to be an even number. Now, just in case if you forgot, our even numbers with my chant that might help you are 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate? Even numbers. And 4 happens to be in that chant, which means that's also an even number. Also, if you were to have 4 circles, each circle would have a friend. There's no odd man out, meaning that all 4 circles have a pair, they all have a friend, making this an even number. So 84 is an even number. Now looking at 98, 8 is an even number. Because 8 is an even number, 98 is an even number, which this means that 98 and 84 all have 2 as a factor. And that means not only is 1 times 98 a factor, but 2 times something. And even if you don't know what that something is that would be multiplied by 2 to create 98, you still know there's already more than 2 factors, making this a composite number. Now, looking at 67, is 7 an even number?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
So that means that this number is odd and 2 cannot be a factor. So 67 would be the answer to this question. However, if we continue on, we have 106. And just like I said with 98, right away, 1 times 106 are your first factors. But I also see that it's an even number. So that means that 2 is going to automatically be a factor. And again, even if you don't know 2 times what number is 106, you still know it has more than 2 factors, making this a composite number. And the same goes for 568. So what do we think 8 is? Is it an even or odd number?
That's an even number for sure.
Making 568 an even number. An even number. Now moving on to 3. So we know that 3 is a prime number, but there's also many numbers that 3 times some number creates that number, making 3 a factor. So the sum of the digits means it's divisible by 3. Now that means that 3 is a factor. So looking at 72, when I mean sum, that's a key word for addition. So let's look at 72. If we did 7 plus 2, 7 plus 2 equals 9. And notice 9 happens to be a multiple of 3. Now, how do I know that? I'm going to list out the multiples to confirm this. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, and we see 9 on this list. That means that 72 shows us that 3 is a factor of 72 because the sum of 7 plus 2 equals 9, and 9 happens to be a multiple of 3. Now, following this, we also have 5, and these are some special rules that might help you identify when you see these numbers in the chart. Because in fact, if we actually scroll up here, looking at all my even numbers, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, they're all blue, which means that they're composite. But now if I'm looking at, let's say, 18, right here, if we're looking at 18, if I was to do 1 plus 8, that happens to be 9 as well. And what we just learned about 72, if the sum of the digits, 8 plus 1, is a multiple of 3, then that means that 3 is a factor. And you can use this for any number you see, even the really, really large numbers as well. So now we're going to move on to 5.
Okay, 5 is my favorite number. For any number with a 0 or a 5 in the ones place or that last digit, 5 will be a factor.
Awesome. So now looking here, we have 55, 80, 90, 105, and 897. Now just looking at these 4 right here, notice all the digits in my ones place. Here we have 55 is a 5, 80, my digit in my ones place is a 0, 90, my digit in the ones place is a 0, 105, my digit in my ones place is a 5. That meets this criteria, which means that 5 is a factor of all 4 of these numbers. But now some of you might see 897 and get a little intimidated because it's such a large number. But really, if you take a look at the digit in my ones place, which happens to be a 7, that's not a 5 or a 0, so that means 5 cannot be a factor. And finally, we have 10. So which number does not have 10 as a factor? Some of you might be wondering because 10 is a large number. However, that means that any number that ends in a 0 means that 10 is a factor. So looking at these 5 numbers, 50 ends in a 0, 80 ends in a 0, 90 ends in a 0, 100 ends in a 0, but 105 does not end in a 0, which means that 10 cannot be a factor. However, 105 does end with a 5, which means the number 5 is a factor. Now, just by looking at this, even though if you want to identify is 10 a factor, is 5 a factor, is 3 a factor, we use these strategies here to help us determine if they're a composite or prime number. So now to go back to what we originally were talking about, you're going to use this information to determine if a number has many factors. Now, if a number has many, many factors, more than 2 factors, then that means that it's going to be a composite number. If that number only has 2 factors, one in itself, then it is a prime number. So if you go through this and you say, okay, 10 is not a factor, 5 is not a factor, 3 is not a factor, 2 is not a factor, maybe only 1 in the number you're looking at is a factor, which means that it's going to be a prime number. Now, I hope today you recognize and take some of these strategies with you and practice using these when you are determining if a number is prime or composite, instead of using this wonderful chart. This chart is here to help you if needed, but hopefully over time you start practicing these strategies so you don't have to use this chart as much, and you start recognizing if 2 is a factor, 3, 5, or 10, or other numbers as well. So I hope you enjoyed